More people in. Okay. Last class, after all, again, what we're doing is ethics and values at time of war. And last class, partly because Israel had just rescued those 4 hostages in Gaza, at the very end of the class, I started talking about that a little bit. And I mentioned there was a place in the Torah that talks about how we went and how it's a Jewish value to rescue the hostages. And I cited something in the Torah, and Janet, who's coming in right now with Roger, Janet, at the very end of that class, also cited an additional verse, an additional pasuk in Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis, in which Abraham went to rescue his nephew Lot, who had been taken captive. And it was a great reference. I even emailed Janet after class to say that was a good one. And I was thinking about it, that I wanted really not to just leave a little bit of that, just a brief little discussion, but actually to make a class in the greater context of Jewish ethics and values. It was going to come later on, but I'm changing the order of things a little to discuss tonight Jewish ethics and values in war, particularly as pertains today to rescuing hostages, because there is something unique for Jews about that. There's something Jewish about that. And when I say Jewish, not in some kind of just throw around a term, but in our halachot, our laws. So I would have been teaching it several weeks from now. Instead, Israel rescued 4 hostages. Now's a good time. I want to begin by noting that the concept, a code of law, what are we learning? Laws, not just what a Jewish heart feels. Well, I've got a Jewish heart. That's how I define what's Jewish. No, it's based on laws. We have codes of law. All people have codes of law. Even dictatorships, tyrannies, Soviet Union or Russia, they have a code of law. North Korea, they all have law codes. And the way it's structured, for example, I don't know North Korean law as well as I know American law and California law. So I can just tell you, in America and California, there are laws, statutes that are codified. Some say codified. In the federal system, it's in the United States Code. That's literally what it's called, United States Code. You might have Title 6 USC for United States Code 37, whatever. And there's codes. And one title, like one section, might be the laws of immigration. And another section might be the laws of transporting of goods that comes under, let's say, the Federal Trade Commission, and so on and so forth. Administrative law, I think that's Title 5, and that oversees different agencies that you know of, the so-called alphabet agencies. And then in California, we also have codes. You've heard of 1 or 2 of those codes. If you've ever been stopped with a ticket while driving, there's a traffic code, whatever it's called, where if you ever get a ticket, vehicle code. And that's what they'll tell you. I'm citing you on vehicle section such and such of the vehicle code. And of course, criminal code. You'll see that on TV shows in the old Dragnet with Joe Friday under such and such, the California Criminal Code, such and such. It was Friday, 9:41 a.m., a sunny day in California. My name is Friday. I'm on crime division, crime beat. Gannon is my partner. So you have codes. In Judaism, we have codes. That's actually what I teach you, what your rabbi maybe teaches in shul or classes. It's based on the halakha, which we define as law. But the law, where does the law come from? The law comes from the codes. It starts with the Talmud and Mishnah. We've talked about the Mishnah and the Gemara. We've talked about it many times. But then finally, it gets codified by Rambam in the Mishneh Torah and Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Arukh, the Code of Jewish Law. And you've seen, we've been learning Rambam together, and we've been learning occasionally Shulchan Arukh. And you see, literally, it's like most frequently, recently in the law, we've been learning the laws of kings and war. And that's a chapter. Unlike other countries and other peoples, and I don't know that the United States Code has a special section like Title 25 or Title 56. We don't go that high, I don't think. I don't think the United States Code has a code on rescuing hostages. I don't know that any people, any religion, Protestantism, Catholicism, Catechism of Catholicism, Hinduism, I don't know if any people or religion other than the Jews and Judaism actually have a formal codification of law for rescuing hostages. And there's a comment in that too. There's commentary in that too. They do that to us. And they don't do that to regular people. Jews are picked on and have been for thousands of years. Is it because we have money? Is it because we are a favorite target of persecutors? I don't know. I think I do know. I think we all know. And so by very virtue of the fact that there's a code on rescuing hostages in the same codes that talk about crime and punishment and civil matters, and that tells you a lot. And we've had to confront that as a people. Most recently, of course, with Gaza and Hamas, and before that, other things. And famously in 1976 in Entebbe, when a couple of German anti-Semites, extreme leftist, radical leftist anti-Semites, joined with a couple of Arabs who called themselves Palestinians, and then they hijacked an airplane and brought it to Africa, to Uganda, and they immediately demanded their ransoms. And interestingly, with Jews, sometimes they demand money, and sometimes, like when you're dealing with the Arabs, they have incredibly insane demands that they expect us to free the Jewish people, to free Israel, to free hundreds and thousands of convicted murderers and terrorists and bombers. And we'll give you back one person or three people in return for 1,150 people. That happened in 1985. And every time, historically, Israel has given in, until most recently. Even most recently, the first hostage exchange, when Israel got back like 140 or so hostages, they gave up like hundreds and hundreds of Arab criminals in return. These are always unbalanced exchanges. And we're going to learn a little about how the Code of Jewish Law warned against getting started overpaying to get hostages free. Because once the word gets out that Jews pay above market rate, whether in money or in criminals that they're holding, then everybody's going to come for it. Then why do you have to buy a diamond ring waiting for it to go up in value when you could go and get some Jew hostages and they're already up in value? And so it's been an ongoing concern. If it's in the Rambam, like that's the year 1100, that's more than 1,000 years ago. If it's in the Gemara, we're talking 2,000 years ago. And it was, and it is. So let's go ahead and learn some of that in the immediate context of that amazing miracle of freeing 4 hostages from Hamas, but recognizing that is a part of the greater Jewish experience, like it or not. And it takes us right into our course, Jewish ethics and values in the conduct of war. So let's continue and let's go into it. Here we go. Thank you very much for being here for this. As always, I've tried to put together a number of sources and make your time worthwhile. Let me just see if I can get some of these things off the screen. I should have done it earlier. All right, let me see if I can. I hope we don't get too much. We're going to get these little black squares on your screen whenever I set it to optimize for video clips, because I have a few music clips. So you may get these little black squares on the screen, and I hope it won't drive you crazy. Here we go. Okay. Let's start with this reference that Janet brought out. last class. Let's start with that. It's the story in Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 14, Perek Dalet, of the war of the 5 kings and the 4 kings. So what happened was there were 4 kings led by the very famous king Kedar Laomer. And there was an uprising of those are 4 kings, strong ones, and 5 kings that were under their heel revolted and tried to upend Kedar Laomer's alliance with his 4 kings, and they tried to become the new world power. So we see that verse 8, Pasuk Ches, Vayetze Melech Sodom u'Melech Amorah, among the 5 smaller cities, kings, that were revolting against the power kings, Sodom and Amorah, who become famous soon after, they are places of terrible evil, but everything is compared to what? I mean, is Russia evil? Is North Korea evil? Which is worse? Or is Hamas worse? So you're dealing with evil upon evil. In our story here, the king of Sodom and the king of Amorah are 2 of the 5 allies. And you'll remember Lot, the nephew of Abraham, had opted to live in Sodom. There had been that encounter. They both were growing successful with their flocks and their cattle. Abraham as a blessing of God, Lot being blessed by God through his relationship to Abraham. And now it got to the point that Lot's cattle and sheep and Abraham's cattle and sheep, there were too much to graze in the common grazing area. And you started having situations where the shepherds and the cowboys or whatever started fighting with each other. And Abraham said, we don't need to fight. It's a big country. And Lot, pick wherever you want. You want the west, I'll go east. You want the east, I'll go west. Lot sees Sodom, it's green, it's just fertile, and he goes for Sodom. It's lush. And so he's living in Sodom. Vayetze Melech Sodom u'Melech Amorah, the king of Sodom and the king of Amorah, and also Melech Adma u'Melech Tzvuyim u'Melech Bela Itzar. These other 3 kings of Adma, Tzvuyim, and Bela, otherwise known as Tsar. So like a country could have 2 names, like Israel and Palestine is the same thing. Palestine, Israel. So these 5 kings, Vayarchu itam milchama be'emek hasidim, and they made war. With whom? Against whom? Et Kedar Laomer, Melech Elam, Tidal Melech Goyim, V'Amraphel Melech Shinar, V'Arukh Melech Alasar. And they fought these 4 kings, king of Elam, and Goyim, and Shinar, and Elasar. Arba'a Melachim et HaChamisha. It's 4 kings against 5. Be'emek hasidim, be'erot chimar. And it happened to be that in the battlefield, there were many, like tar pits. Vayanusu melech Sodom v'Amorah v'yaplu shama. And the tide of battle went to the 4 strong kings, Kedar Laomer and company, over the 5 weaker kings. And the king of Sodom and Amorah, they started to run away from the battlefield. And they fell there. They actually fell in the battlefield. Vanisharim haranu nasu. And some of the other 3 kings fled up to the hill country. And the 4 victorious strong kings won their battle and took possession of all the wealth, all the bounty of Sodom and Amorah. And these are lush green fields, and at the time before they were burned down by God with fire and brimstone, they were just paradises, externally at least. And these 4 kings, having won and driven out the 5 kings, took all the possessions and all the food they could gather, and on top of it, vayiklu et Lot, ve'et rechusho, and they also took hostage. They took Lot and all that he had, ben Achi Avram, vayelechu, and he was Avram's nephew, son of Avram's brother Haran, V'hu Yoshev Bistom, and he had the fortune or misfortune of living in the defeated territory of Sodom. So Lot is hostage. V'yavoha Palit v'yaged Avram Ha'ivri, and someone, a survivor from that battle, there are different rabbinic opinions, we won't take it out in this class, who that survivor was, but he fled to Avram. And remember the name Abram or Avram, eventually his name will be changed by God to Abraham, but now he's Abram. So the survivor fled and found Abram, Ivri, the Hebrew, the Jew, and he was dwelling at that time in a place called Elonei Mamre, in the land of the Amorites. This is way, way before what we've been learning in our Tuesday night Navi class, where David HaMelech was finishing up the job of driving the 7 nations out of Israel and finishing up with the Yevusim, the Jebusites. This is in the beginning of time, long before any commandments to drive the Amorites out, but the Amorites were there at that time. And Avram had 2 very close friends, Eshkol and Aner. And these were his Ba'alei Brit. These were people with whom he had like a pact, allies. It's not like countries like I heard in the last day or so that Russia, Putin, and North Korea enhanced and increased the nature of their current pact and alliance. They were 3 men. Again, everything was smaller then. You didn't have big countries having NATO and like the old Warsaw Pact, but you had individuals who perhaps had private armies, and they would make pacts. Vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv. And now Avram has learned that his brother, interesting term for Lot, who is his nephew, and that'll come out again in another context. Just don't want to take out the time in it here. It's not the reason we're learning this right now. We're focusing Shevi, Shvuya. Lot has been taken hostage. And Avram gathers together the men of his household, an army of 318, and he decides he's not getting involved in the war between the 4 and the 5. He decides he's going for the sole purpose of rescuing Lot. And there are interesting interpretations in the Drashim on what's with that number 318. It's unusually specific. Usually the Torah talks in more general numbers with round numbers. Even when it breaks it down a little, talks about that the men ages 20 to 60 at the time of the Torah, there was 603,550. But it's not frequent that it'll say there was 603,559. It's not, or they were counting the number of Levium, and let's say they talk about 22,000 of these, and so normally it's not done. There are other cases where, for a different reason, it might say 22,273 in discussing the redemption of the firstborn when the transfer was done between Levi and firstborn. But as a general rule, the idea of 318 men, it's not the normal style of the Torah. And there's a midrash that says, if you take the Hebrew letters of the name Eliezer, Eliezer was the main servant, a major domo of Abraham. And as you may know, in Hebrew, every letter has a numerical equivalency. It's called gematria. It's like in English, if you were to say A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, J is 10, Z or Z is 26, assigning a number to every letter. If you take the letters of the name of Eliezer and you tally, it comes to 318. So there are some who want to say that Abraham basically got his major domo Eliezer, and they put the thing together. Whatever, he went to free Lot. And he was successful in the middle of the night. He had a military strategy. They split up, and they successfully defeated the people who took Lot. And he defeated them, and he recovered all of the property that they had taken, and he rescued Lot. Vayashiv et kol harachush, he brought back to the 5 defeated kings all of their lost property. V'gamet Lot achiv, and he also brought back Lot. Urechu shel hishiv, and he brought Lot with his property. V'gam et hanashim v'ata'am, and he also rescued all the other people, the women and people who were taken. Well, the king of Sodom was thrilled. Of course he was. He's about to be massacred. And along comes this guy he doesn't even know from, who just took down the 4 kings he couldn't with his allies and has brought everything back. So he comes out to greet Avram, after Avram has had a success. And it goes on, it goes on, it goes on. We're going to skip some of it. King of Sodom says, my God, you brought home all this property and you brought back all the people. You know what? Just give me the people. You can keep all that property as our tribute to you. And Avram very interestingly says to the king of Sodom, very interesting, I have raised my hand in an oath to God Almighty. I will not take, nothing personal. I will not take any property, anything of any value whatsoever, any payment whatsoever from you, not even a shoelace, not even a string. Below Tamar ani ha'asharti Avram, so that you will never be able to tell anyone when they speak about the great wealthy Abram, you will never be able to tell anyone, you know how he got rich? He got rich because I, the king of Sodom, gave him all the wealth that he rescued when he took on those other kings. I'm not taking a penny from you. Let it be known that my wealth comes only from God. Bil adai rak asher achlu hanarim, the only payoff I will accept is for Anir and Eshkol, because I mean, they went to war with me, and I don't, and Mamre, my third friend, I don't really have the right to say that they can't get their recompense, but I don't want anything from you. So the only thing that motivated Avram was not to get possessions and not to get rich, but to save Lot. And as I mentioned last week, in Bamidbar Perek Chafal of chapter 21, there's a war, a short 3-pasuk, 3-verse war. By Shmaha Kanani Melech Arad Yoshev Negev, the Canaanite king, the king of Arad, based in southern, what later became Israel. The Jews in chapter 21 of Bamidbar are not yet in Israel, they're in the wilderness, but they're sort of wandering and they're within reach of southern Israel in the Negev. And the Canaanite king, the rabbis all are united in saying that the Canaanite king here actually is an Amalekite, Amalek. And why he's a king called Canaanite, etc. Some interesting Gemaras I don't want to take out the time for here because it would take us too far afoot. But these Amalekites posing as Canaanites, they went to war. And Kivai Yisrael Derech Atarim, and the king of this Amalekite pseudo-Canaanite group heard that the Jews were within range. Vayilachem b'Yisrael vayish mimenu shevi. And they went to war with Israel, and they took, according to the Hebrew, the best way to read the Hebrew is they took a single prisoner. The translator here says took some of them captive, suggests several captives, but the better reading is vayish b'manu shevi, they took only one. And if you look at Rashi, interesting Rashi here, and I've got it set up in English, I think. Rashi, vayish b'manu shevi. Okay, and captured from them a captive, it was only one maidservant. Only one maidservant. He cites Hilkhot Shimoni, and Hilkhot Shimoni, it's way down here. If I can find it real quickly, because it's way down here. And if I don't find it real quickly, then I'll just go on. I hope you'll take my word for it. Well, Hilkhot Shimoni is the source for saying that it was only one person, a maidservant, that was taken hostage. Nevertheless, even though it was only one maidservant, the Jewish people went to war over that. Again, I'm not finding it immediately, and I don't want to lose much time on that. So, but it's there. I prepared it, but there's no good kind of mark-off point. Okay, So let's take that off the screen for now, and Rashi as well. So again, it was only one maidservant. So for one maidservant, Israel went to get her back. Vayidar Yisrael neder Hashem vayomar. And the Jewish people, Israel, made a vow, neder, to God as follows. Im naton titena to ama zebi adi. If you, God Almighty, by our going back against them to free that woman, that hostage, if you will give us victory in that battle, v'hacharamti arehem, I, speaking singularly, I, the nation of Israel, will utterly destroy their cities and all of what we are able to pull away, take all the possessions we're able to take as bounty will be dedicated to like the Mishkan, to God's service. Nobody will get rich off that. We just want to go to battle to rescue our one hostage, a maidservant. By Yishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael, God hearkened unto the voice of the Jews. By Etenet HaKna'ani, by Acharem Edhem V'Yadarehem, and God gave that Canaanite, Amalekite entity to the Jews, and the Jews went on to utterly devour and destroy them and their cities by Krashem Makom Chorma. And actually, they named the place Chorma from the word Cherem, place of destruction. And from this, we see both in the Chumash with this war and with Avram with Lot. And I'm going to very briefly reference without pulling it up. I would also remind you, those of you who have been loyally, faithfully attending our Tuesday classes on Shmuel, when we were in Shmuel Aleph, you may recall there was a time when David and his men went out to loot one of the neighboring places, and they came back, and it turned out that the Amalekites had come and had taken all the women hostage, all their women and children. And again, David went to war against them, and he wiped them all out to rescue the women and children. You may remember that. So this is a deep, deep Jewish value. And it's not just because it feels right, because it just seems like the right thing to say. Like they took our Brittany Griner, our WNBA star, who publicly stated that she hates America, and now Putin is holding her. So really, we have to get her back. So we're going to give away, we're holding in our prisons an international war criminal who sells illegal contraband and weapons, deadly weapons to deadly nations. And we're going to give that guy over to Putin in return for Brittany Griner. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a national heritage that comes from our Bible, our Torah. We don't leave our hostages behind, not even a single maidservant. Let's continue. So I'm going to, first of all, share with you, because I do this sometimes, a song. And I'm playing this song because it's a universal Jewish song. Wherever in the Jewish world you go, oh, of course, a lot of assimilated Jews don't know it. But if you're involved in the Jewish world, anywhere in the world, you know this song. It's not just a song, it's a prayer. It literally is in the Siddur, the prayer book, and it is recited in shul every Monday and Thursday, immediately after the Torah reading. Torah is read 3 aliyahs every Monday and Thursday, and then there is a recital of several Yehirat songs, several short petitions to God, and it ends with Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, our brothers, all the children of Israel, all the house of Israel, who are presently being held in hostage, in captivity. It is so central to our historical experience that we actually have a prayer twice a week, long before Hamas, long before Arabs anywhere dealt with us, that we pray every Monday and Thursday on behalf that God should please bring out all Jews who are being held as hostages in captivity. He should bring them out from darkness to light and to freedom. And it's an international song. And there are you can find any number of these. I pulled this one because it's particularly, and by now, if you've been with enough of my classes, you've heard it. It's only 2 minutes.
אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב.
Now, you might think, and I just want to emphasize this, that song and that prayer, well, sure, we say it twice a week and we mean it. I want to emphasize this. Most of us in our class live in America. Sometimes you have people from Israel, and Australia, and other places. I'm surprised sometimes I get emails that I loved your class. Tell me more about yourself. Well, I'm in Australia and I never miss it. Here in America, can you think of a single public demonstration in your lifetime on behalf of Americans being held hostage? In Vietnam, in Soviet Union, maybe there was one such demonstration. I don't remember it. I remember demonstrations, not that Americans are not shy. Forget about Palestine, River to Sea. People demonstrate on Vietnam. People demonstrate on climate change. People demonstrate on January 6th. People from both sides of the aisle. Everybody demonstrates. That's the American ethic. But to demonstrate on behalf of Americans held hostage, or French held hostage, or to the British, for British held hostage, at most you get a public announcement by the head of government that we're working behind the scenes, whichever government. But the idea of a people in whom it is so ingrained in their culture, not just culture, but the religious law, that you have to free the hostages. They're constantly on our minds. I emphasize again that song, and that's a prayer that it's up over 100 years old. It long predates any politics you could possibly imagine now. It's part of the Jewish, and I want to bring out one more thing on that right now. If there's one Jewish community, now the Jews basically are out of Syria and out of Iraq and out of all these Arab countries, and basically we still have a lot of Jews under the thumb of the Iranians. But if there's one Jewish community I really feel for, are the Jews of South Africa right now. South Africa is a viciously anti-Semitic country. They're the ones who brought the case against Israel in the International Criminal Court. So what would I expect the Jews of South Africa to be doing? I would be expecting that they'd be worried about the Jews of South Africa. that a lot of them would be getting out of there, going to Israel or wherever. And I would expect that they've got other things on their minds than the hostages. And that's why I want to share this with you, because it really touched me on a whole nother level, that even Jews in South Africa today, hostages, Jewish hostages, that's who we are. We have our own problems, but we can't forget the Jewish hostages. Warren Goldstein is the chief rabbi of South Africa.
And so these words, we pray for the brave soldiers, we pray for the civilians and soldiers who have been captured, and we pray for Geula.
To me, that's just an amazing thing. The idea that they should have on their minds that people like us in America need to pray for them. And what's going through their minds is they are praying for people, for other Jews who are being held that way. This doesn't exist anywhere else. We take it for granted, parts because we're all Jewish. And if you're in this class, you're already deeply committed to the Jewish thing. And so we take it for granted. We sometimes don't realize who we are and what our religion is and what our way is. And this is why we're called the Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of Kohens, of priests, and why God chose us as Am HaNivchar. The idea is that no other nation is like this. I really have, from classes with me, I know some history. I just don't know any people that are like this. Just as we are an unusually charitable people, there are non-Jews that are very charitable too. But as a people, it is extraordinary. We also have a chapter in the codes of law about that. So let's continue now. But I wanted to bring home, it's not just talk. This is part of the Jewish ethic and value. In war, they take us hostage. We got to figure out how to get them back. So what are our halakhot on that? Let's take a look. In Bava Batra, that's Talmud. Bava Batra is a tractate in the Talmud. And this is Daf Chet Amud Aleph, folio 8a. It's going to go into 8b. They're talking about giving charity to poor people, and particularly to orphans. You're supposed to give charity. And as I just said a moment ago, split second ago, even when it comes to tzedakah, charity, there's nothing like the Jewish value of charity, of tzedakah. It's like so different from the rest of the world. Even the nicest, kindest people, philanthropists, there's nothing like the Jewish concept of tzedakah and the universal Jewish commitment to tzedakah. And so the Talmud's talking about Jews have to give money to orphans. It's already been talking earlier in this segment about all kinds of charity. And now they're getting to giving charity to orphans. Rabbah, that's the name of a great rabbi in the Talmud. He was known as Rabbah. Ramat Tzedakah Ayatme, Devei Bar Mariam. And so what they used to do, not only are you supposed to give charity, but the Jewish community where you live would have a responsibility not only to maintain good roads and law and order and health, even like in ghettos in Eastern Europe and in Talmudic times in the various places in Eretz Yisrael, Palestine, where they were. They also had a responsibility to have gizbarim, treasurers for each community, whose job it was to collect charity. Not just to collect charity, not just to walk around with a pushka, but they would sit and they would know pretty much how much money everybody's good for. There are no secrets in these kind of communities. If you've ever been on a Jewish federation, they know how much money everybody's got. And especially once somebody's given and everything, they know who's got what and they know what to ask for. So just like shuls, they know this guy is capable of giving this, and this guy is only capable of giving that. So they imposed tzedakah, and Rabbah imposed in his place for people to give charity to a certain charity for orphans. Okay, Amar le Abaye said. So what happened was he was imposing charity. This is after the earlier paragraphs. He was now imposing charity on the orphanage, that they have to give charity. Just like the South Africans are busy praying for the Jewish hostages in Gaza, a Jewish orphanage has to give charity. Aren't orphans the number one charity? Well, they have to give charity to other Jews with even greater needs or the same needs. Everybody's got to give tzedakah. So, and that's that word, tzedakah. So anyway, so charity in Judaism is not just, I have a nice, good Jewish heart, I'm a philanthropist. You got to do it. It's like you got to keep Shabbos. You got to eat kosher. You have to give tzedakah. So he imposed tzedakah on this orphanage. Okay? So Abaye said to him, but didn't we learn from Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda? Didn't Rabbi Shmuel, very famous rabbi in the Talmud, son of Yehuda, say, Ein poskin tzedakah al hayatomim. You're not supposed to impose on orphans to give charity, afilu Pidyon Shvuyim, even if it would be to raise money to ransom out Jewish hostages. So what does that tell you right now? Just the idea that a rabbi would teach that we don't impose on orphanages to give charity, even for the case of Pidyon Shvuyim, shows you, number one, that Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming the hostages, is a major priority in Judaism, and even more of a priority than giving charity to orphans. Let's go beyond this. So, incidental to this story, the Gemara relates that Ifra Hormuz, who was the mother of King Shapur of Persia, she sent money. So that's not a Jewish person, but she sent money of dinars, that was the currency, to Rabbi Yosef. Why'd she say that? She said, let the money be used for a great mitzvah of yours. Again, she just, whatever reason, Rabbi Yosef sat and considered, what did she mean when she attached the condition to the gift, saying it should be used for a great mitzvah? Abaye said to him, well, let's figure this out. From what Rav Shmuel, the son of Yehuda, taught. He said one does not impose charity obligations on an orphan, even for the sake of redeeming hostages. Learn from this, that redeeming hostages is a great mitzvah. Pidyon Shvuyim, Mitzvah Rabbahi. That's like the highest kind of charitable mitzvah, is to redeem the hostages. Again, this is 2,000 years ago, long before Hamas and all of these people. And Rava said to Rabba Bar Mari, Menah ha milsa, the Amora Banan de Pidyon Shvuyim Mitzvah Rabbahi. And where do we have this source? I mean, here we are all walking around saying that redeeming hostages is like a number one priority. Is this just like because you have a Jewish heart, whatever that means, coronary Judaism? Or is there like a religious statutory codified reason? Amarle. So Rabbah responds, it says it in the Torah. V'haya ki yomrei lecha anan nitzei v'amarta aleim komar Hashem. Asher lamavet lamavet, yasher lacharev lacharev, yasher larav larav, v'asher lashevi lashvi lashevi. Let's take a look at that a moment to see the source in Yirmiyahu. Jeremiah was talking about the Jews. If you don't straighten out and turn to Hashem and live a proper life, if you're going to be sinful, he's going to take it all down. It was his fate, Jeremiah, to be the prophet of doom. To this day, if you look up the term in a dictionary, the term of Jeremiad, Jeremiad is like a prophecy of doom. And he's saying, Yirmiyahu was saying to the Jews, they're still in the land of Israel, but if they don't watch out, someone it turned out to be Babylonia, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and destroy it. God said to me, even if Moshe and Shmuel were to intercede with me, I would not be won over to that. He's saying, the Jews have reached the point, I basically run out of my patience. Even if Moshe and the prophet Samuel came, I'm out of patience. And out of his love for the Jews, he doesn't say Jews, he says, Ha'amazeh, that people. But we know what he means. Dismiss them from my presence and let them go. So, and if they ask you, God says, to what shall we go for? What do you mean we should go? Where should we go? Thus says God, those destined for plague, those for whom Hashem is going to punish them with plague, you'll go to the plague. Those destined for the sword, to the sword. This is what he means when he says, you haven't straightened out, so just go. Those for whom he's intending death by this, death by that. Those destined for famine, go to famine. Those destined for shavi, for shvuya, lashevi, for captivity, go to captivity. So we're looking for the source of how we know that Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming the captives, is so important. So Rabbi Yochanan says, whichever punishment is written later among those four is more severe than the one before it. Let's look. Cherev kasha mimavet. It said, if you're going to go to the sword, to death, to death. In other words, death, dying in battle is worse than dying by the sword. Rather, dying by the sword is worse than just dying. Look, to die like from old age or illness, it's not like somebody piercing a sword into you. And he says, I can show it to you both from a text and just from logic. If you want, I'll show you a text in the Tanakh that says that it's worse to die by sword than just natural death. Or if you prefer, I'll just talk logic. Sword is worse. If you want just logic, I mean, come on, the sword rips your body up, God forbid, versus a regular death. And if you want, I'll show you a pasuk. It says in Psalm 116:15 that the death of his faithful ones is grievous, is painful for him, not the same as a sword. It continues. So what was after the sword? Famine. Ra'av kasha mecharev. Right? The verse said, if meant for plague or death, death, and if by sword, sword, go to sword, and if meant by famine, famine, if captivity, captivity. Ra'av kasha mecharev. And famine is worse than dying by sword. If you want, I'll give you logic. To die of famine is a long, slow, horrible death. To die by sword is rapid comparatively. And if you prefer, I'll show you a pasuk, a verse in the Bible. Tovim hayu chale cherev mechale rav. It says in the Bible, in Lamentations, in other words, the book of Eicha that we read the night of Tisha B'Av, better off were the slain of the sword than those slain by famine. So famine is even worse. So therefore we see Shvi Kasha Mikulam, and therefore being held prisoner and hostage in captivity is worst of all, because it's the last of that litany of things. Again, that litany was the plague, the sword, which is worse than plague, famine is worse than sword, captivity is worse than all. So that's one source, and then he goes beyond it. Let's skip that. That'll take us too far afield. So that's one source, Baba Batra 8b. Another source, Mishneh Torah. We've been learning halakha so often from Rambam's Mishneh Torah, and this is Hilkhot Matanot La'aniyim. These are another code, another chapter within his, or title within his code of Jewish law, the Mishneh Torah, is the laws of giving charity to the poor. And this is Perek Ches, chapter 8, halacha Yud, section 10. Pidyon Shvuyim kodem leparnas aniyim v'lichzutan. The redeeming of hostages, the freeing of hostages, the rescuing of hostages is higher priority than providing sustenance for poor people and providing clothing for them. There is no greater mitzvah than freeing the hostages. Because somebody who is a hostage in captivity also is within the category of the starving. They're not given to eat the way regular people who are free can eat. Tzmeim, they're thirsty. Arumim, they're naked. They're not given the same kind of clothing. And their very lives are in peril. And any Jew who turns his eyes away from redemption of a slave, of a captive, I don't want to hear about it. I got other problems. Such a Jew transgresses on like 5 different Torah laws. You should not have a heart. If, however, there's a needy person among you, one of your kin, in any of your settlements in the land that your God has given you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kin. So that's one mitzvah. Don't harden your heart to turn away from the needs of a captive. There's the famous law, do not stand idly by your brother's blood. If you turn away and don't want to be bothered with stuff about Jewish captives, you're violating that law. Don't stand idly by your brother's blood. A Jew who, let's say, sells himself into slavery, you're not allowed to oppress him. And you have also, that's the negative laws, and then the positive laws. Those were the shalt nots, and here are the shalt. You're supposed to open your hand generously. And your brother should live with you. And you should love your brother as yourself. So you're running into you're running into like 6 Torah laws plus something from Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, and the Harbei Devarim Kelu, and there are even more than that. All come into play as coming into play with the mitzvah and the requirement, the prime requirement of freeing hostages. Let's say a community has a fundraising drive to build a synagogue building, and they've raised money. If they've raised a certain amount of money, and now suddenly an urgent other mitzvah comes up for which money is desperately needed, they may reallocate the money that was raised for building the building. If they already started using money that was raised by the building fund, already to start purchasing the materials to build a synagogue, the stones for the walls, and for the roofs and the beams. Now that they've already started on the building by buying all the materials to construct, lo yim karum, no longer should they take from the leftover funds in the building fund that have yet to be expended towards the project. Now they no longer may reallocate those funds for some other mitzvah. Ella the Pidyon Shvuyim, with one exception, to free the hostages. So if money is, let's say $100,000 has been raised in a building fund, and they spent $40,000 on the materials for building the building, and the other $60,000 is going to be for the cost of labor and whatnot. I'm just using round numbers. That other $60,000, if that'll free the hostages, it should be to the degree that an amount has been decided is appropriate. That money, and where are we going to get that money? You take it out of the building fund. Not like in the joking way in the movie The Frisco Kid. At the last scene of the movie where they celebrate that Gene Wilder shot all the bad guys, and they decide to make a big party, and the president of the synagogue asked the other one, where are we going to find the money to pay for this party? He says, take it out of the building fund. Here it's very serious. It's the only thing for which that is not considered a misallocation of charitable funds. Even though they brought the stones for the synagogue and already have started shaping them, crafting them, stonemacing them, and the lumber for the beams, and they've already started also crafting it. And everything is now ready, and they've got the the architect's drawings, and they've already laid a foundation, and they're getting started. You even sell the beams and the stones and the foundation, if necessary, in order to free Jewish captives. But if they already finished building the shul, then you don't sell the synagogue. That far we don't go. Rather, you have a separate fund to start redeeming the captives. So the question is there a limit to how much you pay? What if you get into something like Hamas? Well, we'll give you 8 people in return for 1,000 Arab murderers. Well, first of all, let's understand Tikkun Olam. There's not a more misused, arrogated Jewish concept than Tikkun Olam. In the modern social justice movement, Jews in the social justice movement, instead of merely saying, this is what we stand for, not based on halakha, but this is our social justice. Okay, fine. You're concerned about climate. You're concerned about people who are underprivileged. Okay, fine. Many of these are good causes. But they go and they say, it's for Tikkun Olam. Doesn't it say in Judaism, Tikkun Olam, to make the world a better place? And that's why we stand for this liberal cause and that liberal cause for Tikkun Olam. It's a complete arrogation of Judaism, just as a Reformed temple. They use Jewish prayers, and then they just change a few words in every paragraph. Well, why didn't they write their own prayers? Why did they have a Shemona Esrei, and they just change a few words in the Shemona Esrei? And they have the Psalms, they just change a few words in the Psalms. And they're clergymen, or a clergywoman, they call a rabbi. Why don't they call him something else? Pastor, minister, priest. Other people have Swami. I mean, why don't they use a different term? They arrogate the Jewish terms in Reform Judaism to make it like Judaism, but it's not. It's got nothing to do with Judaism. So in the same way, Tikkun Olam is misused. So what does Tikkun Olam mean? To make the world, to fix the world. It means, and there are a lot of examples in the Mishnah, practical things to keep the world order in balance. So let's see. There's got to be a limit on how much money you pay to redeem a captive, a hostage, in order to keep the world order in balance. Because once you start paying insane amounts, even though you can afford it, everything gets imbalanced. Suddenly the value of a hostage goes up, where before a hostage you could get maybe $5,000. Now, hey, they're willing to pay $100,000, so we'll ask for 120, and then you pay 120. Next time we'll take one and ask for 200,000. They paid it. Next time we'll ask for 250, and that's what happens. We're literally seeing it in front of our eyes in this generation. Israel dealing with Arabs. Every single time the Arabs asked for whatever, only to free 1 or 2 or 3 hostages, and every hostage is a world. But to free 3 hostages, they would give up 1,000 Arabs, murderers. So it showed the Arabs, my God, imagine if we take 150, 250 of them. We might even get our own country. So the halakha Rambam says there is a limit. You cannot pay more than what the community understands to be a reasonable price. Not that any ransom is reasonable, but you know what I mean. Because otherwise, our enemies are just going to go running around looking for Jewish hostages to make a living. This is interesting, because on the surface, it sounds contradictory to freeing the 4 hostages in Gaza, but it's a little different. We do not rescue. We do not help hostages escape in order to in order to keep the world in its proper order. What does that mean? As a general principle, if people are held hostage, and it's sort of one of those things like the Jews know that's what happens in our history. We have the bad fortune, we just run into it right now with the Tsar and Russia, or with some medieval European time and government. They picked one of our people and now they want money. In that situation, we're not supposed to try to spring them out of prison and make a TV show out of it, because it's sort of, unfortunately, a commercial exchange. And that's part of the price that Jews, particularly during 2,000 years of exile without a country of our own, have had to live with. And if a government is basically looking to pick up $10,000 by taking some Jew hostage and saying, we want the community to give us a reasonable amount, 10,000, you can raise it. If the Jews will have a reputation that we don't pay, we're going to go and try to spring them from captivity, then that government will start becoming barbaric and cruel versus treating the hostages half decently, because they'll be afraid they're going to try to spring them loose. So they'll become very cruel and they're going to guard them. And so that's the world in which Rambam was writing in the 1100s, based on the Gemara, which was 1,000 years earlier. How does that differ from Hamas? Because Hamas, first of all, they're already cruel. They're already put them under heavy guard, and they're already treating them. We've been reading for the last months. They raped them, they killed them. How many of the hostages are even alive anymore? They're talking about 100 hostages. We all know there's not 120 hostages left. There were 120 hostages left from the original number of hostages taken, minus those that were returned. But by now we know that of the 120, we're lucky if even 40 are still alive. Everyone knows this. And since the Red Cross, like everyone else out there, is anti-Semitic, these are like the only hostages in history that the Red Cross refuses to visit. Everywhere else in the world, the Red Cross goes and they just go to make sure they're alive. Under Hitler, they went to Theresienstadt to make sure, to see how the Jews are being treated. And if you remember, for those of you that learned this, Hitler made a model concentration camp, Theresienstadt, and that was the one camp where he treated them the way hostages are normally treated. They had they had arts and crafts, and they had a little bit of exercise. It wasn't like Dachau and Auschwitz and Sobibor and Treblinka and Majdanek. And the Red Cross went to Theresienstadt and then came back with glowing reports that everything we've heard about the Nazis and the concentration camps, a big exaggeration. They're treated very well for hostages. But even that we don't get now from the Red Cross. If the Red Cross would go and say, we demand as the Red Cross to see the 120, we would get the actual count. We would hear, unfortunately, there were not 120 to be seen. So that's the difference. You're not supposed to try to break out the hostages to rescue them rather than pay in a classic anti-Semitic government to Jews arrangement where there's a crisis financially in the country, so the Tsar takes a hostage. And even there, very famously, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, the rabbinic leader of the community, was taken late in his life as hostage, simply to get money out of the Jewish population by the government. And he gave an order, do not raise money for my release. He said, I'd rather die in prison. He does not want people raising the money being demanded, because if you pay that money, they'll start taking rabbis left and right. And in fact, the community honored he really meant it. And they honored it because they knew he really meant it. And Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, you could look it up, died in prison. So that's the idea. One last thing on this in Rambam. Misha Mochar, I see I'm running over 7:30, so 5 more minutes. And we'll do the remainder, God willing, next week. Misha Mochar Atzmo Uvanav La'akum. This is an interesting one. You don't see this nowadays, of course. But in biblical times and Greek and Roman times, there were Jews who were poverty-stricken, and they sold themselves into slavery, into temporary slavery, so that they could, because they were going to die. Jews living among the Jews who did not have enough money, could not support themselves, and the community would give charity, but it wasn't enough. And out of desperation, they would put themselves up for like to be a slave. In return for they would sell themselves. Someone who sold himself and his children to a non-Jew. Because if he sells himself to a Jew, we don't try to rescue him as a community. That's a transaction he made with a Jew. He's going to be in the Jewish house. He can keep Shabbos. He can keep kosher. Under the laws of Avdus in Judaism, if somebody has a servant in Judaism, there's so many halachas. He has to be eaten properly. He has to eat properly. He has to eat properly. He has to be treated properly. There's just so many halachas we don't have time for. So that we're not worried about. But if you can't find a Jew to buy him, and he sells himself to a non-Jew, so now he's not going to get kosher food. Now he's going to have Shabbos. Not going to be so good. Or let's say he didn't sell himself into slavery to a non-Jew, but he borrowed money out of desperation and then was not able to pay back. So because he could not pay back, if it's the mafia, then you kill him. The loan sharks kill him. But often what would happen is if he couldn't pay back in the old days, thousands of years ago, they would take the guy as a slave. You owe us the money. You can't pay back. We're not going to kill you. You'll come into servitude in our house and work it off. So, Pam Rishona Ushniya, the first time the guy does that, sells himself into slavery to a non-Jew, or borrows money from a non-Jew who can't pay back and ends up in slavery to a non-Jew, servitude. Pam Rishona Ushniya, and even if it happens a second time, it is a commandment on the Jewish community to get this guy out, to pay whatever it costs. Again, a reasonable price. Like he sold himself into servitude for $1,000. He offered the owner $1,000 or whatever it is, $3,000 to get him back. Shlishit, but if you ransomed him out once, he wasn't being held as a captive. He was being held in servitude. He voluntarily sold himself or borrowed and couldn't pay back. So we take him out. And if then he runs short of money and again he does it, again we take him back. Shlishit ein podinotan. But if he does it a third time, we have to go on with life. We can't make a lifetime avocation of freeing this guy. So after 2, that's it. We don't take him out. Avol podinot et habanim lachar mitat avian. But after that father dies, we do go back to the non-Jew and we do redeem any children that he also had brought with him into that captivity. And if it's and if it is that third time, even though we don't redeem him, having done it twice, the imbikshuhu lahargo, but if we get word that this third time they've taken him into servitude and they're going to kill him, podino tomi adam, afilu achar kamapamim, we then redeem him from them, even after any number of his times that he's put himself into that predicament. So I'm going to end now because of time, because we've gone on for an hour plus. And next week, we're going to do part 2. So far, we've learned from the biblical accounts of Avram saving Lot and the nation going to war against the Canaanite Amalekites to save one maidservant, that we have biblical sources. We've also gone into the Talmud, the Gemara, where they've shown us from the Jeremiah prophecy and from other logical reasons that we must redeem hostages. We've talked outside the text simply about the uniqueness of the Jewish experience. And we've gone into pure halacha of the Rambam as to how far we must go. And I have more on this for one more class, God willing, next week. So you see, it is really, really a unique Jewish commandment to redeem hostages. Okay, class is over. Janet, go ahead. What's up?
So maybe you'll clarify it next week. But first, we have that's a mitzvah even more than providing for the orphans to redeem. But then we have don't redeem for the benefit of the world, that each time the price will go up, and then also don't assist in like what Abraham did and go after to or like the raid on Entebbe. So I maybe it'll finish up and the conclusion will be clearer next week when we finish up. But I'm very confused what the final mitzvah is, and also before you gave the text over about don't assist in as the captive escaping, I was going to say by the example of Abram, wouldn't it be better to go in and rescue or retrieve the hostage or the captive than to pay? And
okay, I'm going to
so I'm
answer
confused.
briefly.
And then the other thing is on Americans protesting hostages during the embassy holding in Tehran. Weren't there a couple of get this done, bring it home for Reagan and Carter?
I hate to say it, that's a great proof of how Americans are different, because if something like that embassy had happened against Israel and the Jews, it would be a worldwide thing. And with the Americans, it was simply a political thing that Jimmy Carter had better get that done, because his public image was so much of an effete, ineffective president in many ways. I'm not even saying that that's fair, but that was the public image, which is why he did not get reelected. He had to do something. And that, of course, turned into a disaster. We sent helicopters. It was a disaster. But you asked 2 questions I want to very briefly handle, and we'll continue next week. Number one, Avram would have had to go to war to save Lot, because these kings were not the kind of people who were offering ransom, who were offering, we'll give back this nephew of this guy if he pays a certain price. That wasn't that kind of world. And when you're dealing with those kinds of people, like when you're dealing with people who are willing to negotiate. But with these people, there was no negotiating. They just go to war, and they would go to war and they would wipe out their enemies. And just as they would do that, there wouldn't be much time before they would have killed Lot as one of the people that they had taken. So Avram had to do things before there was no time. As far as how much we pay, and if you're supposed to redeem no matter what, because it's such a big mitzvah, and on the other hand, you're not supposed to pay too much. The idea is not that you should be like a quibbling person and trying to dicker down for the lowest possible price. But the idea is that if you pay, and any ransom price is technically unreasonable. Ransom is unreasonable. But if you pay a price that is unreasonable within the universe of ransom, the concern, and we see it in front of our very eyes, is that for the next hostage, the price goes up and up and up. And not only that, it actually encourages future hostage taking. Because like if what they were trying to do with Hamas on October 7 was to strike a blow against Israel, et cetera, et cetera. They actually came. We now know, we didn't know then. We now know, in fact, it turns out some in the Israeli army intelligence knew then also, they just didn't take it seriously, but they already had found out through intelligence that part of the plan was going to be to take 250 hostages. They actually had that number. And what had happened was they have seen from experience that you take hostages from Israel, it is unbelievable how much they'll give you in return. So, but anyway, let's continue this more next week. Thank you for the questions, and thank you everybody for being here. Have a wonderful week. Shabbat Shalom, and see you next class. Bye-bye.